The Lord be with you. Let us pray. O God, be the master of ourselves as we become the servants of others. Take our minds and think through them, our lips and speak through them, and take our hearts and set them on fire. Amen. Several years ago, our conference's camping ministry was quite a bit different than what it is now. And at that time, all the camps were really run by the pastors. They would get pastors who would volunteer their week or however long they're going to do that, and to go and basically plan and run the camps as far as the programming and things like that goes. And so I used to be very actively involved in our conference's camping ministries. I have been on what was called the Dean's Task Force, which planned what used to be called Senior High Institute, which that's just a very inviting name, isn't it? And I've led workshops at Institute. I was a counselor at junior high camp when I was young and not very intelligent. And the thing I did mostly was, for several years, I directed mini camp. Now, if you don't know what mini camp is for those kids who are basically between kindergarten and second grade. And it only lasts, you have to run two of them a week. The first one runs from Sunday afternoon until Wednesday morning, and then the next one runs from Wednesday evening until Friday morning. And so I would run the first part of the week. And it was at Pine Creek Camp, which is over by Lafayette, which is way out in the woods. My first year that I decided I was going to direct a mini camp, and they gave me, as part of my job as the director, they gave me the first aid kit, and it included snake bite stuff, as well as directions for what happens if a kid gets bitten by a snake. I was really thinking, was I not too smart to sign up for this? Because I really hate, the way I am, I don't do snakes. I'm like Indiana Jones when it comes to snake. So I'm really kind of afraid that if a kid got bitten by a snake, go, sorry, I'm taking off the other direction. That's my job. But anyway, and that never happened. Thankfully, I never saw one. No kid ever. All the kids that got dropped off got sent back home. But the main thing with minicamp is a lot of times it's the first time that these kids have ever been away from home. And so we encouraged them before they would come, make sure the parents would say, to the parents we'd say, make sure they stay with their grandma or grandpa or something like that overnight for the first time, so that camp is not the first time they've been away. The problem is you have to know that dinner time on Monday, the very first day, that's when you're going to have the problem, because that's when kids start getting homesick. And that's when kids start crying. And what you have to do as the director is make sure you separate the crying kid from everybody else, because if you don't, you're going to have a camp full of crying kids. Then you have to get them through the first night, because then they're out from their cabin by themselves, and you have the thing where you have to go, the people staying in the cabin would bring the kid over to the camp, the kid be crying, and so that as the director I'd have to go and sit with them and take them to the camp medical person and that sort of thing, usually that they would have, just kind of calm them down and everything like that. But I thought that's not bad, because I can do camping from Sunday until Wednesday, because Wednesday morning they're going home and then I can go home. So it's not like being on the whole week. And I don't know. So again, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to spend from Sunday afternoon until Wednesday morning with kindergartners through second graders out in the woods. But that's enough of a scare for most people. But there was one camp that we used to have that I never did, but I used to see it in the camping schedule, and I thought it was really interesting. I would love to not to have done it, but to have seen it at least, to be like the fly on the wall to watch that. That was a week of camp called "Are You Afraid of the Dark?" They only ran it for a few years, I think. I believe it was run at Epworth Forest. And everything at that camp, Are You Afraid of the Dark, was reversed. So in other words, you slept during the day, and then at night you did all your camping stuff. So they would go out and do things like all the activities and stuff like that they would normally do during the day, they would do at night. That's why they did it at Epworth Forest, because, I don't know why they call it Epworth Forest. There's no forest anywhere around Epworth. But make sure your kids don't fall into the lake is about the best thing you can do at night. But and I never knew anybody who either went to that camp as a counselor or as a camper. But it sounds a little intriguing. I'd at least would like to have seen it and seen what they did. And when we look at our world today, that's kind of the question that would be a good question to ask. Are you afraid of the dark? One thing about living in this part of the state, as mentioned earlier, living in this part of the state at this time of the year, I remember from when we were in Morocco for 9 years, which also keeps time with Chicago. And at that time, the rest of the state of Indiana didn't change, other than down south, where they keep time with Kentucky. Is this time of the year, it gets dark really early, right? And so, especially around December time, you go out and it's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon and it's pitch black outside. That's really, cheery. So what we do is, that's why we celebrate, since this is the darkest time of the year, getting towards the time of December 21st, 22nd, which is the solstice, which is, of course, the longest and the darkest day of the year. That's why we celebrate these festivals of light that we're getting ready to celebrate. You've got Advent, you've got Hanukkah, you've got Christmas. So we light candles and we put lights on trees and on our houses at the darkest time of the year. Why is that? That's why we celebrate. Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. But we celebrate that at the darkest time of the year because after that the light starts coming. And we put these things on our houses. And I asked somebody, I was in a Bible study group one time, and I asked them, trying to get them to the point of saying, even people who don't necessarily believe, they put the lights up, and that's a way of witnessing to the light is coming into the world, pushing back the darkness. And so I was trying to get them to get to that point, and I said, so why do we put lights on our houses? And this guy said, because my wife told me I had to. So we are witnessing to God's light coming into the world, into this dark world, at this time of the year. Advent was originally 7 weeks long. So we are actually in what used to be Advent right now. I actually would have started last week if we were going on the old calendar, where Advent was is really supposed to be a little Lent. It's like a winter version of Lent. And so it would last 7 weeks before Christmas. And so to prepare us for Christmas, we start hearing scripture readings that deal with issues of light and darkness and deal with things that are going to continue out throughout the Advent season, which is not a reason to celebrate Christmas 4 weeks early. Advent is a different season. It's to prepare us for Christmas. So St. Paul's first letter to the church in Thessalonica sets up the contrast between people of the dark and people of the light. Paul writes, now concerning the times and the seasons, brothers and sisters, you do not need to have anything written to you. For you yourselves know very well that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. When they say there is peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them, as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and there will be no escape. But you, beloved, are not in darkness for that day to surprise you like a thief. For you are all children of light and children of the day. We are not of the night or of darkness. So then let us not fall asleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night. Those who are drunk, get drunk at night. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober and put on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet the hope of salvation. For God has destined us not for wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so whether we are awake or asleep, we may live with him. So he's setting up this idea of people of the day and people of the night. People of the light and people of the darkness. People of character and reckless people without self-control. People who live in expectation of Christ's coming, and people who live as if there's no tomorrow. So there are two kinds of people that he's talking about. And Paul doesn't realize it, I'm sure, but he's putting himself right in the middle of the center of what today's so-called culture wars. Culture wars really have been, ever since the 1960s at least, there's been a battle going on in our society. And we read constantly about red and blue states, conservatives and liberals, moral absolutes and moral relativity, Christianity and humanism, born again and mainline, pro-life and pro-choice. And we start walking through a minefield if we even start talking about these kind of things. I'm not interested in Paul's politics. I'm interested in his theology. And so what Paul is saying is vital to our daily lives, regardless of what our politics are and which side we would come out and in these issues. Paul is saying, first of all, that you ought to be able to tell by a person's behavior whether that person is a follower of Jesus Christ or not. That our behavior should back up what it is we say. I self-identify as a red letter Christian. Now, what that is, that phrase, red letter Christian, was developed by a Jewish DJ on a country radio station in Nashville, Tennessee. He was interviewing Jim Wallace, who is the head of Sojourners, which is a group of Christians who live and work in Washington, D.C., and deal with issues of social justice and things like that. And Jim Wallace was describing what it is that they're trying to do and how they base what they believe and how they live out their lives based on the teachings and the words of Jesus. And so the DJ said, well, what you people are red letter Christians. Because, in old Bibles, the words of Jesus were written in red ink. And so that's an idea, is to base our lives on the teachings and the words of Jesus. So if somebody asks me, or anybody who's a red letter Christian, if somebody asks me, are you a conservative or are you a liberal? The answer is, name the issue. I want my whole life to be shaped by the red letters of the Bible, by the words and the teachings of Jesus. And most people nowadays don't want to think about things in black and white. We want a lot of grays. And a few years ago, there was a college professor named Kay Hoggard who had her students read a short story by Shirley Jackson called The Lottery. And The Lottery is about a small farming community that had a dark secret. Every year, the people held a lottery, and the winner of the lottery is stoned to death in the town square. And the townspeople view this ritual of human sacrifice as a necessary way of maintaining their way of life. So the lottery was originally written to demonstrate the evils of blindly following society's morals. It was written 4 years after the end of World War II, when the world was still dealing with the horrors of what had happened through the Nazism, and a whole German culture that condoned the massacre of 6 million Jews, let alone other people. But what's disturbing about this is that the professor reported that her well-educated college students weren't disturbed by the ending of that story, where the people would go out and stone somebody just because they won that lottery. In fact, few people considered that to be wrong. One student said, if it's part of a person's culture and if it has worked for them, then how can we call that wrong? They didn't view the situation in terms of right or wrong. They viewed it in terms of individual preferences. And so stoning somebody to death is just a mere cultural preference. That's scary. There are times when the followers of Jesus Christ have to take a stand and say, this is wrong. Now, we can disagree from time to time on what actually it is that's right or wrong, but good people can argue about great issues, but we can't say that they don't matter. Christians are called to wrestle with significant moral issues of our time and to make our voices heard, and at times to be able to stand up and say, this is wrong. And even more importantly, we need to live out our beliefs in our daily lives. What's really disturbing is that studies show that Christians don't seem to be living any differently than their not yet Christian neighbors. When it comes to how behavior works, Christians don't live any differently than the people who aren't Christians that live around them. People are in worship, but fewer and fewer people seem to be affected by worship. They don't see the connection between what happens on Sunday morning and how that relates to the rest of their lives. And this is true of our society as a whole. Author Bill Perkins was once asked a prominent business leader to name someone who he considered to be a leader of integrity in both their business and their personal life. He had a lot of wealthy and powerful, influential men and women among his friends and his colleagues, but he could not think of a single leader, not a single one, who demonstrated integrity in both his professional and his personal life. Even those CEOs who demonstrated impeccable integrity in their business lives had moral lapses in their private lives. That's frightening. There's something happening to us as a people, and the moral foundations are crumbling. Paul compares the Christian life to a soldier getting ready for war. He says, "But since we belong to the day, let us be sober and put on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet, the hope of salvation." What he's saying is that it matters to us when you start your day, how do you think of yourself? Are you simply a salesperson, a teacher, a manager, a technician, an engineer, a student, or whatever, getting ready to go to work or school? Or are you a follower of Jesus Christ who happens to be a salesperson, a teacher, a manager, a technician, an engineer, or a student, and getting ready to go for a day of spreading the faith, hope, and love of Jesus to the people you come into contact with at work or at school? And I'm not talking about cramming Bible verses down people's throats, but simply living our life in a way that reflects Jesus. It makes a difference. Are you an ambassador of Christ, or are you just a nice person? National Geographic had an article which is titled, "How to Dress for War." It's about these people in our society who dress up in costumes and reenact battles from the Civil War. Maybe you've seen some of these reenactments of when people go and act out the Civil War. But they're an interesting group of people. They're not just interested in history, these people. They study the Civil War meticulously, and especially the way in which the war was fought. And they spend their time setting up the most realistic reenactments of the historical battles of the war as possible. One of the reenactors is named Michael Melford, and he says they prepare for battle 365 days a year. Reenactors live, eat, and breathe like actual Civil War soldiers did. They wear soldiers' clothes that are sewn out of the same kind of material that would have been in use in the Civil War. They use ancient muskets. And during the reenactments, they live like the soldiers would have lived. They sleep on the ground, they don't bathe, and they eat very little food. They're willing to put up with hardship and discomfort to reenact a war that's been settled for a long, long time. That seems a little weird. But that's similar to what we should be doing as followers of Jesus. Civil War reenactors prepare for battle 365 days a year. They live, eat, and breathe like actual Civil War soldiers. They're willing to endure hardship and discomfort. Think about what an impact the Church of Jesus Christ could have with that level of commitment. Sometime back, People magazine had a story on the training American soldiers receive in urban warfare at Louisiana's Fort Polk Training Center. And these soldiers practice battle scenarios in a mock village. And the village is loaded with fake snipers, landmines, and booby traps. And the training is stressful and it's dangerous. Last November, 2 soldiers died in a training practice when they were accidentally run over by a tank. But overall, the soldiers feel like training in this mock village is necessary for them to do their work. They say the more you bleed in training, the less you bleed in combat. When you're a soldier in combat, you have to believe in your mission. You have to subordinate your own desires to the job at hand. And you have to give yourself completely, because you don't give yourself half-heartedly. If you half-heartedly commit, you're not going to survive. And that's the way it is with people today. We are soldiers of Jesus Christ in a war against the forces of darkness. Some of us may be very uncomfortable with that images of war and forces of darkness. But how else would you describe enemies like racial hatred, child abuse, violent crime, terrorism, or genocide? We might have different levels, lists of the evils that we ought to be fighting, but this is not a world that we look out through rose-colored stained glass windows. Darkness is all around us. And only one group of people is called by God to do battle with these forces, not through violence, but through love. The Church of Jesus Christ. We are God's light in a dark world. Kerry Gandy lives in Maumelle, Arkansas, and he tells of a time when he and his wife decided that it was time for them to get their bodies into shape. And so they knew that there were all different kinds of programs and clubs and books that promised to get them to the goal of getting in shape, but the one thing that really looked like that was their cup of tea was aerobics. And so they decided that they would start an aerobics exercise program at home using their video equipment. So when the alarm went off the next morning, Kerry Gandy looked forward to the thought. He said, I'm going to start a new program and I'm going to get ripped. I want to get really pumped up. As soon as they got their kids off to school, they plugged in the aerobics video. And as soon as they got the kid, and then the lady on the video started going through the different motions with Kerry and his wife's name is Janet, and they were doing their every move and following along exactly with what the instructor said to do on the tape. And they started to, every move then started to hit him like a ton of bricks. He realized that to reach his goal of having a ripped body, it's going to take some time. And it's going to take a lot of time. And after about 5 minutes into the program, he was panting. He couldn't catch his breath. He's sweating heavily. His heart's throbbing in his throat. His blood pressure's pounding in his ears. He thought he was going to die after 5 minutes. So he turned to his wife and he said, "This is hard." He had no more said that when he heard the aerobics instructor say, "Now that we're warmed up, let's begin our exercise." That program had a split screen on it. One was for the regular workout, and the smaller one was for women who were pregnant. He followed the smaller screen. And that led him to two thoughts. First of all, he says, it is amazing what people are willing to put themselves through for a healthier life. I know when I've gone and been running on a treadmill for a while because of various reasons. First of all, I don't have to worry about the weather. And when I was doing that one day, somebody came in and said, "Man, it was a whole lot more fun to get out of shape than it was to get in shape." But it's amazing what people will do. What if we would see the level of importance in doing the same thing with our spiritual life? And two, when we follow Jesus, we need to understand that at times we're going to feel like we're just going to throw up our hands and quit. That's when we need to realize that we've just warmed up. And it's time to become a true soldier of the cross. People of the day. Biblically, there are only two kinds of people. Those who want to be soldiers of Christ, and those who give no thought each day to who they are and to whom they belong. To which camp do you belong?